Hi, my name is Jadwong Wilbur from the one and only the mighty St.Marys College, Lugazi, a proud student there. And here today we are participating in our third crossfire round, and with me I do have my teammates. This is Nanyonjo Tramela, I have Fully Bryce Son, and I have Mugaya Prosper alongside me.
So today's motion states that this House believes that budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines sustainable development goals and environmental considerations. And for the purposes of this debate, we are going to actually affirm, working hand in hand with St.Marys, with St.Micheal High School, Mukono, and as other schools, we expect a win.
Hello everyone, my name is Bashir from St.Micheal High School and I'm the first speaker. With me I have Nasua Cynthia and Abavanessa plus Mesua Shadrach.
At St.Micheal High School, we are negating the resolution. This House believes that Uganda's budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines sustainable development goals and environmental considerations. We are going against St.Marys College, Lugazi. Thank you very much.
House rules. Each speaker has 5 minutes. The first and last minutes are protected. The judge will ring a bell to signal the protected time. The bell will ring continuously after 5 minutes.
This House believes that Uganda's budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines sustainable development goals and environmental considerations. Now, Chair, in the first place, both teams need to understand what are their tasks in this kind of motion. Affirmative ought to come and tell us how then Uganda's budgetary emphasis then is on the infrastructure development, then undermine the SDGs and the environmental considerations. Then negation ought to come and tell us how it doesn't undermine rather than benefit or promote them. Now, Cham, in the first kind of this debate, I'm going to try to explain this motion into layman's English. 1, budgetary emphasis. This is simply the putting of more focus in terms of financial factors or money to something. The infrastructure development is actually the growth of sustainable infrastructure. Currently in status quo, we are seeing that this infrastructure is in existence, but then it's not sustainable to the bit we want it. Then also undermine, this is simply the considering of one thing. This is the consideration of one thing rather than other things, which is going to actually cause to negative impacts of that specific thing. Then the SDGs, these are 17 goals set up by UN to be fulfilled by 2030 for a sustainable and a brighter future and a brighter world. Now, Cham, currently in status quo, we are seeing that according to www.finance.go.ug, the financial sector has provided 13.7% of the budget to the infrastructural development, and it has left out other sectors. For example, the health sector, where we are actually seeing it's getting 8.1%, and the education sector getting 7%. This clearly shows that even in the financial aspects, the country Uganda is putting more focus on the infrastructure development compared to other sectors. Now, for purposes of this debate, affirmative is going to base on the following SDGs to actually set its premises. 1, that is going to be climate action, good health and well-being, quality education, no poverty, zero hunger, reduced inequalities, life on land and life on water. Now, Cham, in this motion, both teams need to understand that we are not actually going against infrastructure development, but then this emphasis that has actually been put in the budget is the one that is actually causing the undermining of the sustainable development goals. Now, Cham, in my point, I'm going to talk about environmental degradation. What is this simply? This is simply the lowering of the quality of the environment in terms of air, land, things like maybe the water and other factors to consider. Now, Cham, how has this actually been taken in place? We're saying that the nature of current infrastructure, which also complies to things like industries, things like industries, we have actually seen that these have gone further to then use carbon-based fuels, which is actually emitting a lot of gases, causing pollution in the environment, and hence causing causing no respect for the sustainable development goal, which is actually climate action. We're actually saying that this environmental degradation has gone on to actually accumulate in here, because we're actually seeing currently this industrial development has then caused bodies like NEMA to actually get less funds, which is actually promoting things of environmental considerations not being put in place. How is this? We're actually saying that if NEMA gets less funds, we're going to see that it is not going to actually put on more policies, put on more strategies to then combat this pollution. Hence, we are going to see that it's going to this industrial development in terms of roads, in terms of industries. We're going to see that they are going to actually lead to negative impacts like death of people and many respiratory diseases. I rest my case.
Resolved. This House believes that Uganda's budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines sustainable development goals and environmental considerations. Our dear judges, for this resolution, we as Team Negative, we are actually saying that infrastructure is a necessary and strategic investment that enables the achievement of the SDGs and can be environmentally sustainable if implemented very well. Therefore, we are saying that infrastructure is not actually competing with SDGs, but it is a condition for them to succeed. Our dear judges, if we are to look at the Uganda's budget 2024 to 2025, we see that transport infrastructure and services are allocated 13.7% of the total budget, which is approximately 5.1 trillion according to the Uganda government. And we also see that infrastructure development can actually be directly or indirectly influencing all 17 SDGs, including 72% of the targets according to the Green policy rejected. So, our dear judges, the first farmer came and told us that infrastructure leads to environmental degradation. Well, I'd like to denied. I'd like to inform you that infrastructure doesn't automatically harm the environment. It is weak enforcement which does. So we as Team Negatives, we're actually saying that instead of denied, instead of that, they should actually improve this by the construction of greenhouse infrastructure, reforestation offsets, and climate-smart constructions. Now, our dear judges, these are the following views of the negatives. Infrastructure is a foundation for achieving the SDGs. And we see that infrastructure is not directly opposed to SDGs. It is actually crucial to achieving many of them. As we can see, SGD 9, which clearly talks about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So what do we see by this? We see that SGDs are actually supporting infrastructure. That's why we are saying that Uganda's budget should actually focus on infrastructure. And then we also see that roads, which is part of infrastructure, actually lead to hospitals. And hospitals is also part of the SGD 3, which majorly talks about good health. And also we see that these roads help us to go to school, obviously. And schools is part of SGD 4, which talks about quality education. Now, our dear judges, an example is the Kampala-Jinja Expressway and the expansion of the electric grid, which have already enabled increased investment, job creation, and regional connectivity, which is helping in the SGD of zero poverty, because when these people get jobs, obviously they earn money, hence reducing on the poverty. And then we also see that infrastructure catalyzes economic growth and job creation. Better infrastructure attracts foreign investment and tourism, strengthening Ugandan's economy. And according to the Uganda National Planning Authority, every 1 Ugandan shilling invested in roads yields over 5 Ugandan shillings in economic return through trade and productivity. Now, our dear judges, how are we as the negatives planning to better implement the infrastructure development strategy? We are going to integrate sustainability into project life cycles. And how are we going to do this? We are going to use resource-efficient buildings. We are going to design buildings that minimize energy and water consumption, use of sustainable materials, and incorporate green spaces. And then we are also going to use sustainable construction materials, utilizing materials with low environmental impact, such as recycled or locally sourced materials. And then if we see SDG 6, which talks about clean water and sanitation, we are going to ensure access to clean water and sanitation. I beg to rest my case.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute. This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
And I think I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Understand that you are living in this country, Uganda, whereby we are having this whereby we are having emphasis on the infrastructure development. Now understand the nature of infrastructure development that we're having in Uganda currently. We are having roads, we are having hospitals, we are having schools, but what we lack, my judges, is you have to understand that what we are lacking in this, what we are lacking in current status quo, we are lacking the social, we are lacking the good host, we are lacking the medicine that is to be used in these hospitals. We are lacking the teachers, the quality teachers. We are lacking the chalk. We are lacking all the facilities to be used in these infrastructures that we have in this country, Uganda. Now you understand that when team proportion comes and tells us that actually we're putting more emphasis on this infrastructural development, they come and tell us that we're going to develop more good roads, more good hospitals, more good schools. But understand that if at all, even if we develop this infrastructure, but when we reach at a point in case where the services we get from this infrastructure is actually bad, we have to realize that there will be no instance of promoting this infrastructure development. In the long run, we'll be achieving these SDGs like health, like education. Because notice, it is not about the infrastructure. It is not all about the building, but it is about the quality education. It is about the teachers. It is about the facilities to use in this infrastructure. Now understand that team proportion comes and tells us about things like emphasizes that actually it is not infrastructure development, but it is a weak emphasis. Now what is bringing about this weak emphasis? We come to realize that actually it is still the emphasis on this of this infrastructure development. Because look, if at all we are allocating more money in this if we allocate more money in this infrastructure development, we shall have weak emphasis in other sectors. Because look, at a point in case where we're prioritizing and giving much funds to this infrastructure development, this necessarily means that there will be climate change. Because look, there will not be emphasis on these sectors that then combat this climate change. Because look, at a point in time where NEMA is given less money as compared to this infrastructure, where we come to realize that actually there will be the carbon in action will be taking place at a faster rate. Because look, we come to realize that the things that bring about this carbon accumulation, like even infrastructure development, are existent, and they are providing more funds. We are giving them more funds. We are giving them more money to further exploit the resources, to further build more roads, to further cut down more trees. We come to realize that actually this will lead to neglection of critical SDGs. Take for example the education sector, take for example the health sector. Currently status quo, as seconded by their first speaker, that 13.7% is invested in the infrastructure development. Compare it to the health sector. So the health sector, we come to realize that actually only 8.1% is allocated to this sector, and the education sector, it is 7% that is only allocated to this sector. This gives us a great incentive to say that we come to realize that actually even in this infrastructure development is in existence. We are having this infrastructure development, but what we are lacking are the facilities used in these infrastructures. So you come to realize that in the long run, we shall have bad health for the people. We shall have bad quality education for the people. Because hey, look, we come to realize that at a point in time where children go to schools, where children have roads that lead them to schools, where children have real roads that lead them to hospitals, but they lack medicine from these hospitals, they lack quality teachers from these hospitals. We come to realize that actually these SDGs, the team proportion, they are saying that they are enhancing to promote like health, like education, because of the good facilities like hospitals, because of the good facilities like roads, will not be in coexistence. Because the social service that is provided by these sectors is not in existence. Now, panel, notice, they come and tell us that actually, they come and give us an example of the Kampala Express Highway, which then promotes the easy trade. But look, this Kampala Express Highway, as I said, that it is one of the good infrastructures that have in Uganda. You have to understand the citizens of Uganda pay to use this infrastructure. Is that really sustainable? At a point in time where people's welfare is not protected, since they use their own money to use this infrastructure, we can realize that actually there will be bad social service delivery, and at the end of the day, it will not be favoring these farmers whom they claim that they will be using these roads to take their foods to their market centers, because they will be paying. And at a point in time where we are not emphasizing on other sectors, we come to realize that at a point in time where there is less money allocation in other sectors and more emphasis on this infrastructure development, we come to realize that there will be no sustainability in the country. That's it.
Result. This House believes that Uganda's budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines sustainable development goals, which are the SDGs and environmental consideration. Now, dear judges, we were clear from our first speech. We were like, Uganda's focus on infrastructure development is a necessary strategic investment that enables the achievement of the SDGs and can be environmentally sustainable if implemented very well. Now, dear judges, it is very clear that the SDGs cannot even be implemented without the what? Without the infrastructure. So we emphasize on infrastructure development such that we can be able to implement the SDGs because they are interrelating. Now, I would start with rebutting. Infrastructure development infrastructure development also concentrates on schools at some extent. Therefore, this means that projected. This also means that the schools are also being considered and they are building infrastructure in schools. So does Team Affirmative want the students in schools to study under trees because they don't want infrastructure? NEMA is also rejected. NEMA is still at some extent funded by at some extent funded under infrastructure. For example, the green spaces, water drainage systems, that is all under NEMA. So when you're telling me that we are not funding NEMA, it is all still under infrastructure. Then we have roads. That is what they have pre-current speaker has spoken. We have roads, we have schools, we have hospitals. Dear ladies and gentlemen, she's exactly proving our case that the SDGs are being implemented by supporting the infrastructure development. Now, she came and said there is no medication in the hospitals. But dear judges, have you seen Uganda raising fundraising programs for medication? Or do people pay vaccines? Do people pay for vaccination? They don't. Which implies that Uganda is purely capable of doing what? Of providing the medication, just that it needs to be implemented well. She said that there is poor education and
clarity, speaker.
Say they should just be improved, please. If not trade, where shall we get the money for funding the what? The SDGs. That is why we come up and we tell you that the SDGs they correlate with the what? With the infrastructure. So in the presence of infrastructure, that is when the commerce and trade is boosted, and then we earn the money so that we can do what? We can boost the SDGs. Now, dear judges, infrastructure is the foundation for achieving the SDGs. It is critical in achieving many of the SDGs. For example, SDG 9, which says industry, innovation, and infrastructure, specifically calls for inclusive and sustainable infrastructures. Roads is access to hospitals. That is one thing. Roads is the access to hospitals and the schools. I'm sure even the dear farmers came here through the roads. So if those roads were not developed, then it means there would not even be this debate. Infrastructure catalyzes economic growth. Because of infrastructure, foreign investment and tourism is strengthened, and that is improving Uganda's economy. Thus, Uganda can be able to implement the SDGs very well. According environmental impact is manageable with regulation. It is manageable with regulation. That is through construction of green infrastructure, rainforest offsets. That's as my speaker spoke previously. Uganda needs to close its infrastructure gap first in order to pave way for the SDGs to be perfectly implemented. Now, dear judges, what are the things that we are supposed to note? You can't prioritize advanced SDGs and environmental goals of high-tech. Rest my case.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute. This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
Chair, I believe that team opposition loses out on this debate, right? So we have to understand that by this motion, we're not against infrastructure, but we're against the overemphasis on it, right? Meaning that they're putting too much attention, they're putting too much finances on these people, right? So by the second speaker coming here and telling us that we want people to study under trees, that's not the reality. Infrastructure development will still be there, but only that it will take a bit slower, but at the end of the day, it is still there. But we're rather trying to make sure that sustainable development goals and the environmental considerations are not undermined, right? So by this, what you have to understand, first of all, the team proposition speaker stated it well, right? If implemented well, infrastructure development might not undermine the sustainable development goals and environment considerations, right? So what you have to understand, that even currently in status quo, we've had cases of where we are seeing things like, for example, deforestation, right? My speaker comes and tells you properly that at the first of this debate, that at the end of the day, resources are very key, right? At a point in time whereby finances are being diverted from key sectors, like, for example, Ministry of Health, Ministry of education, and even the name itself mean that at the end of the day, implementation will be poor, right? You're going to set up industries, but you're going to tell them that, for example, make sure that you treat your waste before releasing them, right? And it's never supposed to do that, right? But at the point in time when NEMA lacks funds to actually implement these policies, mean the repercussions will not be there, and people will be ignorant about these things, right? Then, next, we have to understand, even from this debate, is that first of all, we're arguing on the argument of sustainability, right? My speaker states it well. My speaker comes and tells you that, for example, we're looking for sustainable infrastructure and sustainable services, right? Now, you're going to have a good hospital, but the doctors are not professionals. You're going to have a good school, but teachers are not professionals. So what are you going to get at the end of the day? There's not going to be quality health. There's not going to be quality education, right? And at the point in time whereby Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health itself is not financed very well, you're going to see teachers that are not going to be motivated to do their work simply because they're underpaid. Then that is why even currently in status quo, we have been having strikes by teachers, we've been having strikes by doctors, simply because there has not been enough wages, or the ministry has not received enough funds to actually pay them. So at the end of the day, we do believe that that is due to the overemphasis on infrastructure development, right? Then talk about the environmental bit of it. I believe that team opposition is so good at sugarcoating their argument, right? They present us a nice version of it, but how do you understand? You look at the Kampala Ginger Highway as the first speaker stated. Now, first to the once mighty Mabira, the largest forest, the once largest forest in Uganda, that has now made it around second or third, right? So why is this possible? Because the overemphasis on infrastructure development has actually made sure that perhaps these things have led to destruction of what? So perhaps the vegetation of forests and all that, the swamps, right? So meaning at the end of the day, what are we seeing? We are seeing that, for example, we have shown you how it has really undermined environment, right? We have shown you how it really undermines things like, for example, air pollution, because the industries itself, we do not have clear emphasis on it, right? For example, the policy is meant to be in place, NEMA can't take note of them very well, and NEMA can't implement its work very well, simply because it's underfunded, right? Then we also look at things about sustainability, as I said, right? First of all, meaning that by the mere fact that they are focusing on infrastructure development, we see that, for example, that's the government's focus, meaning that the government will focus there, less policies will be put on the SDGs, right? So meaning that the mere fact that less policies are put on the SDGs, we are going to see that these SDGs will slowly die out, right? They put a claim that they are interconnected, yes, but you have to understand that the more emphasis on one actually diminishes the other. That's what our argument is, the emphasis, right? So let me summarize this debate and weigh it up, right? So we believe a team that wins this debate is that one that shows us how it undermines, right? Because they come tell us that things like, for example, weak enforcement is one that undermines, right? But at the end of the day, we are comparing something that, for example, these are all problems that may undermine, but at the end of the day, we picked out one problem and we're putting clarity on that, right? Then next, one that wins this debate is one that shows us how we used to say that and how it actually affects the environment and the SDGs. With all that, I believe that team proposition wins this debate with a lot of clarity and evidence. Thank you so much.
Resolved, the resolution for today states that this House believes that Uganda's budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines the sustainable development goals and environmental consideration. As the negators, we came and we told you the meaning of the resolution on our side, and I would like to re-echo it. As the negator side, we believe that Uganda's focus on infrastructure is a necessary strategic investment that enables the achievement of the SDGs and can be environmentally sustainable if implemented properly. So, the first affirmer came here and talked about the fact that they are not considering infrastructure development as the problem. The whole affirmative speech has been rotating around the fact that these guys are not focusing on infrastructure development as the problem, but they are focusing on the services being provided. They are talking about teachers being demotivated from performing their jobs. They are talking about lacking doctors in the hospitals. They are talking about things that are not clearly making sense in this resolution. Denied. They're talking about things that are not making sense to this resolution, because clearly, as an farmer, infrastructure is supposed to be the problem. They're supposed to show us how infrastructure how the emphasis on infrastructure development is undermining the SDGs and the environmental development goals.
POI speaker.
Denied. As the negators, we came here and we clearly explained that infrastructure development can directly or indirectly influence all 17 SDGs, including 72% of the targets according to the Green Policy Platform. Why did we say this? The farmers are coming and telling us that the infrastructure development is actually hindering other things from working. They are showing us how it's undermining other things, but we are telling you, they're showing us how it's undermining the SDGs, all 17 of them. But we are telling you as negators, we are telling you as negators that actually infrastructure development is the foundation for all these SDGs to be attained. Why are we saying that? Our point number one was infrastructure is a foundation for achieving the SDGs, because infrastructure is not directly opposed to the SDGs. It is actually critical to achieving many of them. SDG 9 clearly talks about industry development, innovation, infrastructure, specifically calls for inclusive and sustainable infrastructure. What are you going to do without infrastructure? You're talking about high-tech development. You're talking about teachers, schools, but clearly all these things are coming from what? Infrastructure. We are talking about handling the environmental crisis by constructing green infrastructure. We are having reforestation offsets projects. We are having climate smart constructions. Basically, you're telling us infrastructure is the problem, but we are bringing infrastructure to also solve the problem. So the problem may be caused by infrastructure, but infrastructure can solve the problem actually. Infrastructure is the key to solving the environmental consideration goals. Infrastructure is also the key to handling all the 17 SDGs. We talked about how we as negators are planning to better implement the infrastructure development strategy to promote fast development and cater for SDGs and environmental issues through integrating sustainability into project lifestyles. How are we going to do this? Resource efficient buildings. We are designing buildings that can minimize energy and water consumption, use of sustainable materials, and we are incorporating green spaces. Therefore, as negators, we are clearly attacking the SDGs and we are also attacking the environmental issues that we are having. We are talking about sustainable construction materials, utilizing materials with low environmental impact, such as recycled or locally sourced materials. SDG 6 clearly talks about clean water and sanitation. We are also fixing that with infrastructure development. We are talking about ensuring access to clean water and sanitation through sustainable water management. How is this going to be achieved? Through infrastructure development. Therefore, I conclude by saying infrastructure development is not the problem and its emphasis is not also the problem. It can also be the solution. Thank you very much. I rest my case.
This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
My name is Isigo Bashir, 4th negator, and I request not to observe protocol. How are you, Speaker?
I'm fine, dear.
Given the global urgency to climate change, as you stated, has Uganda undermined to respond?
Pardon?
Given the global urgency to climate change, as you stated, has the government of Uganda undermined to respond?
I don't get your question.
You don't get my question, okay? Does economic growth create a financial base needed for long-term SDGs implementation?
Basing on the economic growth.
So, SDGs based on economic growth. Thank you. Are the current infrastructure projects in Uganda effective with SDGs?
They are not effective.
They are not effective?
Yeah, with the SDGs.
Okay. In relation to the term emphasis.
Pardon?
In relation to the term emphasis. When you're treating malaria, do you take tabs or you go for tablet sponging? Choose one.
What is tablet sponging?
Oh my God. Okay. Okay. That in the SDGs advocate for infrastructure development?
Yes, they do.
They do. Oh, thank you very much. They do advocate for it. Thank you. Which SDGs and environmental considerations that do not require aid from infrastructure development?
None.
None. Okay.
Yeah.
And you talked of NEMA. Who funds NEMA? Or where does it get funds?
NEMA gets its funds from the Ministry of Finance.
Where does the Ministry of Finance get the funds from?
From the sources of money of Uganda that include taxes, grants, donations, and etc.
Okay. Can emphasis on two issues diminish one of them?
Pardon?
Can emphasis on two issues diminish one of them?
Emphasis is always on one thing.
On one thing.
Yeah.
And then do you think hitting of... You can take your seat. Starting with the question, I asked them about global global agency for climate change, which they just told me, he just told me he doesn't get the question, but clearly their second speaker came and talked about us putting the emphasis on infrastructure development, whereby they are thinking that we are going to we are causing environmental degradations. But we see that Uganda is the one that is adopting and launching initiatives on national climate change policies, and it is increasing funding in the renewable energy projects. I asked them a question about economic growth. Economic growth being a financial base needed for long-term SDGs implementation. They clearly accept, they say, yes, it is the financial base. We asked them where the NEMA gets its funds. They tell us from the Ministry of Finance. We again ask them the same thing, where does the Ministry of Finance get funds? They tell us they get the money from, their money from taxes, but we see the taxes are got from the roads. That's infrastructure. I asked them if the SDGs are advocating for infrastructure. Yes, we see SDG 13, climate action. We see affordable and clean waters. That is 7. We see industry, innovation, and infrastructure. That's why we said infrastructure development is a background. It is achieving. That's why we are putting our emphasis. We are putting our emphasis on infrastructure development so that we are hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. I asked them on emphasis, do you go for tablet sponging or tabs? We can't literally put money in SDGs that are not going to bring out money, but we shall put the money in the infrastructure development that's going to create economy of which we are going to have money to fund that. And as I conclude, I say that prioritizing projects with high environmental returns ensures that economic growth does not come at the expense of sustainability.
Speaker, is this a value motion or a policy motion?
My friend.
Either policy or value?
It's a value.
A value, thank you. Then why are you saying if implemented very well? Meaning in Uganda, it is not properly implemented and that's why it's undermining, right?
Pardon?
Thank you very much.
Pardon?
Speaker, does quality of infrastructure guarantee quality services?
Yes.
Either yes or no. Yes. Without proper policies, without paying teachers very well, we are guaranteed of proper education. Thank you, Speaker.
Can you talk about education without talking about
Speaker.
their payment?
Excuse me, Speaker. Speaker, are SDGs about sustainability?
Yes.
They're about sustainability. How does the current infrastructure of Uganda you are investing in more money promote sustainability?
You yourself, you told us that
just tell me,
money.
Please, Speaker. Just tell me how it promotes sustainability.
Yes, you just told us that the taxes you're getting from the
Thank you
infrastructure
very much.
is
Enough.
the one that is
Okay,
funding your sustainability.
Speaker, excuse me. Of what importance is it to get money from infrastructure and you still emphasize the money you are getting from infrastructure and infrastructure? Is that development? You get most of the money from infra, you put it in infra. Is that development? Don't you think, Speaker, that if you focus most of the money in one sector, it brings about economic imbalances in a country? Either yes or no. If you focus most of the money in one sector, don't you believe it brings about economic imbalances? Either yes or no.
Okay, I think you've asked a lot of questions, right?
Either yes or no. Excuse me, Speaker.
It depends.
I have a lot to ask. Either yes or no, please.
Okay, pardon your question.
Speaker, are we against infrastructure?
Yes.
Okay, Speaker, is the current Uganda's infrastructure environmental conscious or it is not environmental conscious?
It is very environmental conscious.
How? Just clarify on that, please.
Thank you very much. We are getting the long-term financial funding.
Thank you very much. Financial funding, which is not taken back to NEMA staff. Okay. Chair, I'm going to just clarify on a few ideas. These people tell us that currently in Uganda, focusing most of our money on infrastructure is something very good, right? That it's the basis of other SDGs. But then we tend to realize that we have these infrastructures in existence. We have Mulago Hospital, we have stuff like, those different UPE schools. But then look at the Sustainable Development Goals. They have to be achieved by 2030, right? Now, we are remaining with only 6 years. What is Uganda's progress towards achieving SDGs? That means they hold the highest urgency for them to be putting more money other than the infrastructure. Yes, we are not against infrastructure. Infrastructure should get the money. We should get the tax out of the infrastructure. But then, even if that is true, but then how does infrastructure then undermine, right? How does it undermine environmental considerations? I think that is something they don't put into considerations. We bring about something like environmental degradation, right? I think where that is existent, sort of like using fossil fuels, releasing greenhouse gases, I think where that is true, we are undermining environmental considerations, which looks like considering the sustainability of what? Of the environment. Chair, I am going to still go on just a few ideas. On the idea of maybe they tell us that it promotes industry, innovation, and maybe infrastructure. We are looking at sustainability. We ask them a question: does quality infrastructure guarantee us quality services? No. Then why should we focus most of the money in infrastructure and leave out things like health, leave out things like education? We are not giving them enough money. Teachers are suffering low salaries. They are not even guaranteed to teach the students very well necessarily because they are getting poor salaries. I think for the idea that we have some existent infrastructure, we should then leave our focus on infra, and then we put most on sustainable development goals, so that we get best education for most of the people. I also think maybe on the idea that it does not guarantee, I think we get a lot of quality education because what we look at is this education and health being given more money, and thus we shall get quality education, not merely education.
Thank you very much. This was fairly executed round of debate. But before I go into my remarks, I would like to put up a few concerns. When we are faced with a resolution of this nature, we have to, first of all, look at what factors are we considering for tonight's discussion. In this case, this debate called us to examine whether the excess or the emphasis on the budgetary, let's say the emphasis on the budgetary additions, or let's say, sorry about that. This debate called us to look for which team is going to show us that the emphasis on budgeting for infrastructure development is actually undermining sustainable development or the sustainable development goals and environmental considerations. What did we expect from Team Affirmative? From Team Affirmative, we expected you to clearly show us that this excess budgeting, if I may put it in such a term, is in the long run not going to support SDG achievement, and in the long run, it is going to undermine environmental considerations. So what do we get from this side? From the first affirmer, we see you explaining what you understand by emphasis, infrastructure development, how you understand undermining, and what you call the SDGs. And then you come and give us a status of how budgeting is happening right now. You tell us that there's 13.7% that is being allocated to infrastructure development, then 7% to educational sectors, so on and so forth. So these are very good arguments. Then later you go on and show us a stand that goes that emphasis on infrastructure development is in a way undermining some SDGs, because at the end, why have infrastructure yet the people that it is meant to cater for are not getting the best services that they might get on a better day? You go on and show us that with infrastructure development, we have industrialization happening, we have different construction happening here and there, and at the end of the day, due to the releases from such facilities, we have environmental degradation. These are very valid arguments. Upon such a stance, that the marks were as follows. Content, I give Team Affirmative 24, Team Negative 25. Style, I give Team Affirmative 15, Team Negative 14. I differ greatly on strategy, where I give Team Affirmative 25, Team Negative 27, giving a total of 64 and 67 for Team Affirmative. So according to me, rather for Team Negative. So according to me, Team Negative takes this win.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our appreciation to first speakers today, second speaker this side. Thank you so much. To the fourth speaker, Negative. The way you ask those questions very well, is that you should also be very well at the response. Okay? Good cross-examination. Now just improve on the response. If you feel the question they ask you could lead you to make a contradiction, just rather find a way of dodging it out. Okay? To the affirmer 4, that's very good cross-examination. I keep it up. Second to this, was it a policy resolution or was it a value resolution? Now this is one of the questions that goes Team Negative. But actually one of your fourth speaker brings it clearly that it's actually value. So if it is value, then does it really give you room to come and say that, you see this and this is like this, but if properly managed, then it can be this and this? Because actually what you're talking about is already in place. So rather, why don't you now come and tell us how this infrastructure has been properly managed? Because if your team case is saying that if properly managed, now the question could come, if not properly managed, now don't you see that now the infrastructure is going to become a disaster? So you see, it was even a good argument for you to come, and actually I think it also came in where you talked about, for example, when they were talking about the funding of the NEMA, and then you are able to tell them, but you see, with development of the infrastructure, it also comes, with the contribution to the NEMA. So don't tell them that if properly managed, tell us how is it actually being managed. For example, when you had arguments, for example, you come and talk about, for example, the construction of the trenches, you come up, because now for them, their biggest argument was saying that yes, you're talking about infrastructure, but what about the infrastructure like the industries that are actually coming up with a derogation to the environmental concerns? That is an argument that has totally no response from Team Negative. Listen to me. The only response you come up with is you telling us that, you see, if properly managed, this and this. But on another day, don't even say if properly managed. Because you see, when you say if properly managed, so now the question would come, meaning if not properly managed, now don't you think that what you're supporting on the other side of the day, it is going to have a disaster? So why don't you just take a final stand and say, no, whatever you're talking about has nothing to do with what you're talking about? Because it was actually a good argument for you to come and say that, you see, at the end of the day, there is that interconnectedness. Meaning there's no, you're going to have the SDGs being put in place without what is coming up from this side. Meaning, for example, if they're talking about education, they have been able to restrict or to highlight some of the SDGs. It was a very good argument for you to tell them that, okay, now what about the education without the structures? What about the health without the construction of the hospitals? Now, one of the arguments that also now comes from this side, okay, after the hospitals have been set up, after the education has been set up, what next to do with the services? Now, this is also now a question that also now comes to Team Affirmative. So now, do the services also extend to infrastructure? Of course, no. But now you need to make it clear to them. Because, of course, it was a good argument for you to come up and tell them that, you see, after the construction of the schools, what about the issue of the teachers? After the construction of the hospitals, what about the issue of the medical practitioners? After construction of the schools, what about the issue of the money that is given? That's why we are having issues of industrial strikes and what? This is what actually made me give my marks. Personally, my decision is descending in this manner. Style, I give both of you 16. Content, I give both of you 27. I define strategy to a 28, to a 27. Good performance, 71, 70. So according to me, it is a vote positively to Team Affirmative. Thank you so much.
I want to say that this was a quite good debate, and I want to commend speakers for really staging such a debate. It's a highly advanced debate that required much technicality, but really people tried to do justice to it. Yeah, like other judges have said, let us improve on areas that have been highlighted. But I think I really need to commend the style of both teams, especially the affirmative team. You have really appreciated the speaker roles, and there is a way you're really engaging. Third affirmative and fourth affirmative, thumbs up. Into what was discussed. The affirmative case was a nice one, really. And it is one that said that we have the budgetary emphasis on infrastructure development undermines in two ways. One is that we have certain destructive infrastructure towards the sustainable development goals, especially regarding the issues to do with environmental considerations. This is an issue to deal with industries that use carbon fuels and environmental degradation. Then two, there is insufficient or partial implementation in achievement of the sustainable development goals. They tell the negative team that in as much as structure is very important, there is need for us to question the quality, the quality of service that is being delivered in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. And they say that, yes, we have now funded the structure, but again, the money we are getting from funding the structure, we are still funding the structure. Now, while really these were very good arguments, but I feel like they did not really turn up so well in the debate. It's because these are arguments that are now later built on in the third and fourth speeches. The first and second speeches dwell specifically on destructive infrastructures, issues to deal with carbon fuel industries, issues to deal with, basically it was about carbon fuel industries and environmental degradation. Now the negative case is that no, an issue to deal with the budget emphasis specifically deals with interdependence in promoting these SDGs. There is no SDG amongst the 17 that can exist without certain infrastructure. That is why I feel like it was detrimental to an affirmative in this case to leave it an open debate and consider things like poverty, health, and education undefined. To what extent do they qualify to exist as sustainable development goals? I also want to appreciate the first affirmative this side. You really did a good role in characterizing your debate. Content, I give affirmative still 25, I give negatives 24. So affirmative was really very good in relating its content to the debate that they were staging. In as much as you had a nice debate, you are unable to provide that sufficient content to support your debate. Now, strategies where I differ. I give the negative team 28, I give the affirmative team 24. Why? The consistency, relativity to the motion, and engagement with your strategy that the negative team applies within this debate gives them an upper hand in fulfilling their role of rebuttal, unlike you who slightly fail on your role of proving within this debate. In totality, it is a 69 for team negative and a 67 for team affirmative. So it is not a unanimous decision, it is a split decision 2-1 that the negative team takes the day. Thank you.